The Leading Like a Lady podcast was created to remind Black women, young and old, that acting like a lady is exactly what the world needs in leadership. Don't forget to subscribe to the blog so that you receive updates on when we post directly to your email. I've been trying to think about what is the most materially useful podcast episode to record after this past Tuesday. And I wanted to be really thoughtful about it because we already have a lot of people finger pointing, blaming, making lists of shoulda, coulda, wouldas, and some offering actually pretty good analysis of how we got here, which is all fine because everyone is reeling and trying to process basically what happened. I didn't want to just add a repetitive voice to the commotion that's happening already. I wanted to offer something a little bit different. What I've landed on so far is an analysis. I'm going to attempt to explain why you're hearing and seeing so many posts about Black women no longer wanting to fight, putting down their so-called capes, putting down their so-called weapons, and saying, it's your time to fight. I want to say that the best explanation for this is setting us up for failure, and how that was represented in Kamala Harris's campaign. As many of you have probably heard some people say, she only had around 100 days to run a presidential campaign, which is unheard of for almost every candidate that's run in the past at least 20 years. This is an unprecedented situation where an incumbent president was pressured tremendously by his party to step down and step away and give the incumbency, quote unquote, to someone else, to not continue running for a re-election. So that's another thing. But then it's equally, or sorry, not equally, it is tremendously worse, I guess. I'm trying to pick my words carefully. When you ask this incumbent to step aside so that someone who has a profile that has never been seen in the history of presidential campaigns is given the torch. There's a very popular political pundit, Alan Lichtman, who apparently is the Nostradamus of presidential elections. Before this election, he has only falsely predicted one other election. And ironically, it's one that was very similar, not in terms of this election specifically, but in terms of controversy, which was the Al Gore run against Junior George W. Bush. The reason why I bring that up is because for the Al Gore and George W. Bush campaign, I wonder if there was similar hubris and similar blindsidedness that led to Lichtman failing to predict that election correctly. I think it's important to list out at least a couple of the 13 keys that Alan Lichtman is relying on for his predictions. Like, he focuses a lot on incumbents, so he doesn't really talk about two new presidential candidates coming in to run in the race for the first time, which is very interesting to me because we've had several elections where that was the case, especially with the one prediction that he got incorrect, which was the Al Gore versus George W. Bush election. I don't know if he's counting Al Gore as an incumbent because technically he wasn't. He was the vice president for Bill Clinton, but I digress. Okay, so the 13 keys. The party mandate, meaning what the incumbent's party or the candidate's party represents in terms of their platform, and them having a majority in the House of Representatives to show that the public wants them to continue with that agenda. Contest, meaning there's no serious contest for the incumbent party nomination, I need to dig more into that, but I'm assuming he means that the other candidate is not a serious contest against the incumbent. Or maybe he means that there's no primary run against the incumbent, which is, if it's the second one, that's going to be interesting for our scenario. So in general, incumbency, that meaning that one of the candidates is this current sitting president, which we clearly already know. There's no significant third party candidate. That's number 4. The short-term economy is not in a recession during the election campaign. Keep that in mind. Long-term economy means that, and this is verbatim, real per capita economic growth during the term of the candidate, or the incumbent, I should say, equals or exceeds mean growth during the previous 2 terms. So if this is an incumbent, they only had 1 term so far. And then I guess they're also assuming the term of the previous candidate, whether the economy kept growing as the transition happened between the 2 candidates, the previous president and the incumbent that's running again for re-election. Policy change, meaning the incumbent's administration affected a major change in national policy that might either work positively or negatively against them, I assume. Social unrest, there's no sustained social unrest during the term, which is a major key, which I don't, we'll get to it. Scandal, number 9, the incumbent administration is not tainted by a major scandal. Again, we'll come back to that. 10, foreign military failure. The incumbent administration suffers no major failure in foreign or military affairs. Boy, we'll come back to that. 11, foreign military success. The incumbent administration achieves a major success in foreign affairs or military affairs. Number 12, the incumbent party candidate is charismatic or a national hero. I think the second one is more easy to say objectively versus charismatic. And 13, there's no charismatic challenger to the incumbent, which there was. We have to be frank. Donald Trump is extremely charismatic, especially to his MAGA base, which is why the Republicans didn't try to run any other candidate besides him in this re-election, or in this 2024 campaign. Because he predicted Al Gore to beat George W. Bush, who at that time, way back in the day, we thought was the worst thing since, I guess, Reagan. He pales in comparison now to Trumpism, to MAGA. But at that time, he was the worst thing anybody could have possibly thought could happen to America. So again, ironic that he also miscalculated that election. But I'll stick to this one with Kamala. He goes on and on anytime he was on a news program prior to the election about his keys, the keys that he uses to predict an election. And he says the keys are always right? They're like his tea leaves. And I was watching a podcast on YouTube, which I am obsessed with. It's called Higher Learning. The 2 hosts are Van Lathan and Rachel Lindsay, who was formerly the Bachelorette, the first Black Bachelorette. And I think that's important too, because as a first Black woman anything, she was very keen to pick up on something that Lichtman failed to address in his analysis of who was going to win in this round against Kamala and Trump. And she basically said this. She said there are no keys in his analysis for Black women presidential candidate. And I thought that was so observant of her, someone who, she's a trained lawyer, so she's a smart girl. But Alan Lichtman and a lot of men, I'm sorry to say this, white men like him in academia, in political punditcy, tend to think that they are, maybe they just come across as thinking that they are too renowned. They just come across with this aura like, I am too me to be wrong. And you can interpret what you think me is, but I think it is like subconsciously, whether they want to admit it or not. I am a white academic man, very well educated, and I carry myself as if I know what's best. And I wonder if that is the hubris that led us to where we are today, and that has let Black women down, and that has now led them to say, you guys take the battle, we are bowing out. And I'll explain more as we go along, so just stick with me. There is a New Yorker article that was published when Biden first decided to step down and hand over the presidential race to his vice president, Kamala Harris. I think I actually misquoted, so it is not the New Yorker, it is the Council of Foreign Affairs that said something interesting that I think a lot of people should have taken note of. But I see that this was published 1 month before the election. So I'm going to do a little bit more digging, but I'm going to start with quoting this because it says something very poignant. It says, just how close is the race? As of today, 536 national polls have Kamala Harris up by 2.6 points over Donald Trump. The Real Clear Politics average of national polls has her up by 2.2 points. That might sound like a notable lead, but if 2020 is any guide, a 2 to 3 point lead in national polls gives the Democratic candidate only a 46% chance of winning. 46% meaning below 50%. 2 months into her campaigning, and the Council of Foreign Affairs did its analysis and said that she had less of a 50% chance of winning. Ironically, it was our friend Alan Lichtman who, in Political magazine, predicted that Joe Biden dropping out of the race when he did led to the Democrats losing the incumbent key, he said, and then also the mandate key. So under these circumstances, it says three of the four undecided keys would have to fail or to fall to predict a Democratic defeat: third party, social unrest, foreign military failure, and foreign military success, which is literally what happened. So it boggles my mind even more that Alan Lichtman stood on his ground before November 5th and said, but Kamala will definitely win. Because he said it right there. Like all the things that he said, third party, social unrest, especially foreign military failure, should have immediately said Donald Trump is going to win. And what I think is happening is that we've already saw what Donald Trump as president would look like. And I wonder if these, again, white male political pundits thought that they could will whatever they want to happen, that they were begging for sophistication to come back to America through their mental might, rather than just seeing what the country is, what it has always been, to be honest with you. I was watching Ali Veshi as well on CNN, and he asked the question of another white male academic from Harvard, a question that I think is crucial to what I'm going to explain regarding Black women. He said, people don't think that the system is strong and would hold against Trump. They think that it's been a long-standing gentleman's agreement. There's no real, like it's all a mirage, basically. It's a facade. And he said, no, of course not. And I think that is, again, failing to understand the American project. Because if it was truly about systems and actually abiding by what the system said, we would have never had slavery. But if you're saying that, let's just say all people are created equal and have the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, how do you reconcile slavery? Except by saying, well, in our gentleman's agreement, we're going to all agree that these are not people, these are not humans. How do you go 100 odd years or more of saying that women can't think for themselves and therefore shouldn't be allowed to vote or even open a bank account on their own if the systems that you have in place recognize civility and recognize the true order of things that's supposed to make sure everybody feels comfortable, an equal participant in the democracy. Moving forward, Black women are saying that we have tried to help, not even tried to help, but we have attempted to make that the standard in America for the sake of our lives, because we are the most hurt by the systems not working. The systems never worked, were never built to work in our favor in the beginning anyway. When we have been fighting for it, we've been fighting to actually institute it, to be honest. And a lot of these systems that have been instituted are less than 100 years old. So they haven't really been tried, tested, and true. And just so a plan for the worst case scenario moving forward. I mean, if it's not obvious, there was a huge failure with Gaza. And then that led to another key being affected, which is social unrest. We had all the protests at universities across the nation, and then we just had people in general protesting against Gaza, meaning Palestinians that were based in America and other people who were serving as allies. The scandal was that they were supporting a genocide. The UN has declared it a genocide. The scandal of continuing to supply weapons to support a genocide. And then we have incumbency. So Alan Lichtman admitted that he did not factor in the fact that the technical incumbent, which was Joe Biden, stepped down 2/3 of the way into the election campaign and left his VP only 100 days to campaign. It's something unprecedented for him since he's been measuring these outcomes. The other thing I'm extremely surprised that no political pundit brought up throughout the entire election, I only learned about this after Trump won. And this is strange to me because I was really keeping up with everything that was going on. And I don't remember anybody reporting on who his campaign manager was. His campaign manager was a middle-aged, I guess, or a little bit more elderly white woman. And I feel like that could explain a lot regarding the huge turnout of white women, outside of just the historical reasons for why white women have overwhelmingly started to vote on behalf of Republicans, let alone Trump. But I think that the role that she played must have been huge in getting that voter demographic to support him in as large of a percentage as they have. So, who is Trump's campaign manager? Her name is Susie Wiles. She's apparently a fan favorite of a lot of historical Republicans, do we want to call them that, or pre-MAGA Republicans, because I found out about her through CNN, and several of the Republican commentators on the panel discussing Susie Wiles and her success with Trump were singing her praises highly. So we'll dig a little bit more into exactly who she is. So more importantly, before we dig into her history, she is the first female chief of staff in the history of the United States. So not only did she successfully get the first convicted felon to run a successful election campaign into the office of the presidency, she is now going in as basically the second in command, notwithstanding the vice president in the White House. So she's going to be maybe the third most powerful person in the country. So she has never worked for the government. She's only run campaigns according to political.com. She successfully helped Ron DeSantis win in Florida as governor in 2018. She supported several major Republicans. So her career began in the very, very early stages as a scheduler for President Ronald Reagan. And then she also supported Mitt Romney, and she was deputy director of operations for the campaign of then Vice President Senior Bush when he was running in 1988. So she's been around for a while working these several different campaigns, whether it's for the presidency or whether it's for governor, and also the Senate. So I guess that's how she has, drummed up this reputation amongst these, again, historical or pre-MAGA Republicans. And now she met Trump and has successfully led him back to the White House. Again, I don't see any analysis that talks deeply about how that might have impacted Trump's ability to still garner a huge percentage of the white woman vote in America. I don't want to make assumptions because I would rather quote a political pundit who has done this for a long time. But I wonder if her knowing and understanding that base, because she kind of represents that base, that she was able to somehow manipulate Trump into doing things that might have been trigger words or words that would have resonated with them, whatever those words might have been in any of his campaign rallies that got them convinced to reelect him. I don't know where that fits into the keys. There's no real place for them in Alan Lichtman's current model, and he has said that he was looking for suggestions from the crowd. But the main point of this podcast, again, is to talk about why Black women are stepping back. And I guess from this information, what I assess is that, once again, he meaning Trump, has platformed majorly a white woman to basically run his campaign and essentially, whether directly or indirectly, speak to their needs versus the needs of the communities that he was claiming that he wanted to help, marginalized communities, the Black community, etc. But this was an example of the Democratic Party not setting Kamala Harris up for success, because I don't know how that didn't factor for them, at least. Like, even if the public was unaware, I don't know how that didn't factor for them to really coach her in figuring out how to combat that. I don't know if they were trying to do that by going to these podcasts with majority white audiences, like the Call Her Daddies, and she was also potentially going to go on Joe Rogan. And now in hindsight, that even if he would have went the other way and still endorsed Trump, I really, really think that hurt her in the end, given who Trump's campaign manager was. She seemed to know where Trump needed to go in order to tap into the fear, the angst of certain white populations. And they needed to combat that by going there and offering a different narrative for them to consider, them meaning the white demographic that Trump was clearly able to capture. And going to the Joe Rogan podcast, yes, I know 3 hours was an egregious request probably for her, given her schedule and her tight amount of time that she had to campaign. But in hindsight, that was probably going to be invaluable. Now, that's once again Black women trying to save the day and do the miraculous, and I'm sure she was probably exhausted. And again, that then just goes back to the whole thesis of this podcast episode, which is explaining why Black women are feeling extremely exhausted right now and are verbalizing that they are handing the fight over to everyone else. And especially when you're platforming someone who, again, is the embodiment of everything that those people, again, that are part of the worst case scenario, hate, disdain, and will want to vote against, start to actually put in a solid, wise plan for how that person can actually realistically win. And also run some models, like real scientific models based on voting patterns and history, and see, is it even viable for this person to win? Because frankly, I think if they did a lot of this work over the past 4 years of their term, the models would have shown what political would have shown. Because these things don't happen only within a week of the election coming up or a month within the election coming up. Now, mind you, I think that other factors that happened more recently over the past year, including the war in Gaza, would have made it even worse and harder for Kamala to realistically think that she was going to win. But there were a lot of things before then, before the war in Gaza, which was the economy, which was the jobs market, etc., that could have shown them that, especially with all the stress that they were going through in middle America, that they would have seen that their frustrations would have been too much for them to be willing to give the presidency to someone like Kamala. So then the hard truth is to be honest with us. Yes, it's nice and a cool thing to platform the first Black woman, first Asian woman. If we were in another situation, that would have been something that was very inspirational and something that would have made Black women feel seen, for sure. Unfortunately, this was not the right time. And I know that would have been hard for someone like Kamala to hear. And it would have seemed as if like we were pushing the opportunity for this to happen further and further back. But hey, I think as a part of being an ally is also being honest and not setting us up for failure. And we also would have had to humbly say, okay, this is not our time right now. Realistically, it does not make sense. So even though symbolically it would look amazing, it's time for us to just wait a beat until the environment is perfect. And so they could have looked for, and what they should have done, this is what a lot of people are saying, what they should have done is ran a primary and tried to find a candidate who would have kept us from having yet another Trump presidency this year in 2025, and would have made sure that Democrats were actually representing the needs and the wants of their electorate, because the primary that they ran would have made us choose who the next candidate would have been based on what we feel is needed at the moment. And Black women, as we always do, would have shown up. And even if there was no Black woman candidate available for us to choose from, I think the majority of us would have understood and would have just done what we needed to get done to make sure that the worst case scenario, again, which is what we're living through right now, did not happen. Allyship means more than one thing. It does not mean just blindly saying we're going to just put Black women everywhere and platform them and make sure that they are seen as the face of and leadership of, things that they traditionally are not made leadership of, because you did that. And then they started talking about DEI hires when you started putting them as leaders of major corporations. When you started appointing them with these new DEI roles, people would backlash, and then you left the Black women hanging. You didn't leave them prepared to deal with that backlash, and then the Black women felt overwhelmed, and then they either quit or you let them go, right? So being a real ally is more than just saying we want to put you in the room, right? We want to put you in the room and make sure that you're actually prepared to make an impact in the room. And we're going to put you in a room where you are safe to do your job. And we're going to make sure that we're going to protect you at any cost while you're doing that job so that you can be your very best and not feel overwhelmed. They did not do that for Kamala. They gave her a Hail Mary and said, okay, we messed up. Can you clean this up real quick? And clearly she could not. She was not prepared to do that. And a lot of you do that to Black women in more ways than one. And so this is the reason I assume and I predict we're saying enough is enough. And that's why we're not stepping up to the plate anymore. At least that's what people are saying online. They're saying that they're minding their business. They're tending to their own mental and physical health. And frankly, you might say that will be not be in our best interest, because Trump is coming for all of us. And we already knew that, though. And that's why we went out and voted the way we did. And maybe it's not in our best interest to say we're going to sit back. Maybe we do need to step up a little bit and try to do some things like building community. Like maybe right now we're thinking about it too individualistically. So right now, yes, we are resting and taking a break. But I do think there's something to saying Black women, we need to form our own communities and insulate ourselves and make sure that we have each other's back, especially women of a higher socioeconomic status, Black women meaning. But in terms of the rest of the American project, we are saying no. This whole commentary on the gentleman's agreement, it also made me think about Elliot Richardson. Elliot Richardson was the Republican Attorney General at the time of Nixon's term when he was under investigation for the Watergate scandal, or what would become known to be the Watergate scandal. And he was appointed by Nixon. And this is an example, I guess, of people claiming that the system does work and that there are structures in place to prevent someone from becoming an ultimate dictator and commanding or demanding that their political appointees do exactly as they say and what they say to do. Elliot Richardson famously went against, again, the president that appointed him and decided to put a special prosecutor in place to investigate Nixon and to eventually draw up papers of impeachment or letters of impeachment, despite Nixon giving him his job. That's not the systems necessarily working. That's literally the example of a gentleman's kind of agreement, because at that time, which is shocking to me because again, we're talking about the 70s, where there was a lot of other nebulous things going on, that I wouldn't say it was a better time in America where people had more self-respect, because there was still things going on like political assassination. So I'm not going to say that, but I will say that it was Elliot Richardson's choice to not do the easy thing. And we're clearly seeing time and time again that in this modern age, in this 21st century, in this most recent history of political campaigning, that no one has any shame anymore, frankly. I don't know if that's a very opinionated thing to say, but it's hard to see or envision how moving forward, any political appointee, especially in the position of Attorney General under the Trump administration, will decide to move in the same way that Elliot Richardson did during a time where he could have easily decided to be on the side of his boss, who was basically trying to maneuver sort of like a Trump, but didn't go as far, evidently. This was longer than I expected. I hope that explains to you why Black women in so many ways are saying no to fighting moving forward. And I hope that moving forward, I don't know what's going to be left to fight for after these next 2 years minimum, but hopefully moving forward, you meaning anyone who's not a Black woman, will do a better job of ensuring that this project, the American Democracy Project, is not constantly put at risk of failing. Don't forget to subscribe to the blog so that you receive updates on when we post directly to your email.